My name is Madeline, and at 35 years old, I watched my family toast to my financial ruin with a bottle of vintage champagne. I had just walked downstairs the morning after my birthday, only to have a check for $100,000 tossed in my face. My father smirked, announcing he had just sold the coastal estate my grandparents left exclusively to me. He needed the cash to save his failing business and pay off my sister's massive credit card debt. They thought I was trapped a quiet auditor who would just accept the scraps they handed me. They had no idea that exactly 24 hours earlier, I had executed a financial maneuver that would legally obliterate them all. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who thought they could walk all over you. Growing up in an affluent Connecticut suburb, my family projected an image of absolute perfection. My father, Harrison Sinclair, was the CEO of a manufacturing company and carried himself like royalty. My mother, Beatrice, was a master of social manipulation, treating our family life like a public relations campaign. But behind the closed doors of our sprawling estate, the reality was a constant, exhausting hierarchy. I was the eldest, the responsible one, the quiet girl who preferred spreadsheets and logic to country club drama. My younger sister, Skylar, was the undeniable golden child. She was 30 now, but she still acted like the spoiled teenager who threw tantrums when her designer credit card was declined. The morning after my 35th birthday dinner, a dinner where my mother spent more time criticizing my husband Owen's modest salary as a high school teacher than actually celebrating me, I woke up early. The house was quiet, or so I thought. I slipped out of my old bedroom, leaving Owen sleeping peacefully, and headed downstairs to the kitchen for some coffee. Instead of the usual morning silence, I heard the distinct sound of a cork popping, followed by loud celebratory laughter coming from the formal dining room. I walked through the arched doorway and stopped dead in my tracks. My father, my mother, and Skylar were gathered around the long mahogany table. My father was pouring expensive champagne into crystal flutes, his face flushed with the kind of arrogant victory I knew all too well. Skylar was the first to see me. She gave me a wide, entirely fake smile, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around her glass. "Good morning, birthday girl," she chimed. "We are just celebrating a little family victory." My father set the bottle down and reached into his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and tossed it casually across the polished table. It slid and came to a stop right in front of me. "Happy belated birthday, Maddie," he said, his tone entirely too casual. "I finalized the paperwork this morning. I sold the coastal property your grandparents left behind. That is your cut." I stared at the piece of paper. It was a cashier's check made out to me for $100,000. My brain, trained to analyze risk and detect financial anomalies, went into overdrive. The coastal estate my grandfather had left exclusively in my name was a prime piece of beachfront property. It was easily worth over $5 million. "You sold my property," I asked, my voice dangerously flat. "Our property?" My mother, Beatrice, quickly corrected, stepping forward with that familiar gaslighting tone she used whenever she was about to justify something horrific. "Let us not be selfish, Madeline. We are a family. Your father's manufacturing company has been hitting some rough patches lately. He needed the liquidity to avoid bankruptcy and save the family name. And I needed to clear out some debts," Skylar added, rolling her eyes as if her financial irresponsibility was just a quirky personality trait. "Terrence and I have a lifestyle to maintain. We cannot just lose our Manhattan apartment because the market is tough right now. You have to be a team player, Maddie. You already have your stable little job as a risk auditor. You have Owen. You guys live a perfectly fine, boring middle-class life. You do not need a massive estate sitting empty." The sheer audacity of her words made my blood boil. They had secretly brokered a deal to sell my inheritance to cover my father's business failures and my sister's shopping addictions, and they expected me to just quietly accept a tiny fraction of its worth. I looked at my mother, who was sipping her champagne as if this was just a normal Tuesday morning transaction. "We paid for your life, Madeline," she snapped, sensing my rising anger. "The least you can do is help your sister and your father when they need it. Do not be an ungrateful child." "You paid for my life," I repeated, the years of suppressed resentment finally bubbling to the surface. Mom, I worked 3 jobs waiting tables, tutoring, and doing data entry just to pay my own college tuition. You and Dad refused to co-sign my student loans because you claimed cash was tight. But that exact same month, you bought Skylar a brand new luxury SUV for her 19th birthday. You never paid for my life, I paid for my own. My father slammed his hand down on the table, the crystal glasses rattling. Do not speak to your mother that way, he barked, his face turning red. I made an executive decision for the good of this family. The deal is done. The buyers transferred the funds into escrow this morning. You get $100,000, which is more than generous considering you did absolutely nothing to earn that property except be born. I looked down at the check again. $100,000. It was a bribe. A pathetic attempt to buy my silence while they stole millions from me. I thought about Owen sleeping upstairs, unaware that my family was actively trying to rob us blind. I thought about my grandfather, who specifically left that property to me because he knew exactly how greedy and financially reckless my father was. I reached down and picked up the check. My fingers gripped the thick paper. Skylar smiled clearly, thinking I was going to fold just like they had conditioned me to do my entire life. She took another sip of champagne, completely satisfied with herself. Instead of thanking them, I slowly and deliberately tore the check in half. My mother gasped. Skylar choked on her drink, coughing loudly. My father's jaw dropped as I placed the torn halves over each other and ripped them again, letting the pieces flutter down onto the pristine mahogany table. That property is worth at least $5 million, I said, looking my father dead in the eye. And more importantly, Dad, you have absolutely no legal right to sell it. My father recovered his shock quickly, his expression hardening into a cruel, mocking sneer. He leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a condescending whisper. That is where you are wrong, Madeline. I am your father, and I know how to handle business. You might want to ask your brother-in-law about the paperwork before you start throwing tantrums. Right on cue, heavy footsteps echoed from the marble hallway. Terrence Banks, Skylar's husband, strolled into the formal dining room with the casual, overwhelming arrogance of a man who believed he owned the entire world. At 38 years old, Terrence was a high-end, cutthroat real estate agent who catered exclusively to the Manhattan elite. He was always impeccably dressed, currently sporting a custom-tailored navy suit and a heavy gold watch that cost more than my first car. He flashed a brilliant, perfectly white smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Good morning, Madeline Terrence," said his deep voice, smooth and practiced. He walked over to Skylar, placing a kiss on her cheek before resting his hands on the back of her chair. He looked at the torn pieces of the check scattered across the mahogany table and chuckled softly, shaking his head with mock disappointment. "I told you she would not appreciate the gesture, Harrison. I told you she would make this process difficult." I crossed my arms over my chest, refusing to let him intimidate me in my parents' home. There is absolutely nothing difficult about this, Terrence. That coastal property is legally mine. You cannot simply sell a house you do not own. Terrence reached into his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. He opened it with agonizing slowness, clearly savoring the moment of triumph. He extracted a single sheet of heavy bond paper and slid it across the table toward me. It came to a complete stop right next to the ruined check. "Actually, Madeline, we can," he said, his smile widening into a predatory grin. "Because you gave us permission." I looked down at the document. The bold letters at the top read, "General Power of Attorney." My eyes scanned the paragraphs, which outlined a comprehensive transfer of legal and financial authority directly to my father, Harrison Sinclair. At the bottom of the page, resting perfectly on the signature line, was my name, Madeline Sinclair. It was a flawless forgery. Every loop and slant mimicked my handwriting with terrifying accuracy. Below it was a notary stamp officially validating the blatant criminal lie. My blood ran cold. The sheer criminality of what they had just done took my breath away. "You forged my signature," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You actually forged a legal document to steal my inheritance." Skylar rolled her eyes, taking another long sip of her champagne. "Oh, stop being so melodramatic, Maddie. It is just paperwork." Terrence leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table to assert his dominance. It is legally binding paperwork. He corrected his tone, dripping with absolute condescension. And using that perfectly valid power of attorney, I acted as the representing broker for the Sinclair family. I secured a buyer late last night, an anonymous investment group looking to acquire coastal properties quickly. They wanted a fast cash deal, no contingencies, no inspections. We closed the sale for $2.5 million. $2.5 million, I repeated, staring at him in absolute unadulterated disbelief. The property was appraised at over $5 million just last year. You sold my grandparents' legacy for half its value just to get fast cash. Terrence shrugged, completely unapologetic. The real estate market fluctuates, Madeline. Fast cash always comes with a steep discount. And honestly, it was a brilliant move for everyone involved here today. I secured a massive broker commission for facilitating such a rapid, high-value transaction. The rest of the funds were wired directly into your father's corporate accounts to save his manufacturing firm from going into receivership. Skylar's mounting debts are completely cleared. Everyone wins. Everyone except me. I fired back, the anger finally breaking through my calm professional facade. You stole millions of dollars from me, Terrence. You committed felony forgery and real estate fraud to line your own pockets and bail out a failing company. I will call the police right now. I will have all of you arrested for this before lunch. Before I could even reach for my phone, my mother lunged forward across the table. Beatrice grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. Her previous haughty, dismissive demeanor vanished entirely, replaced instantly by the desperate, manipulative victim persona she had perfected over several decades of marriage. Madeline, stop this right now, she hissed, her eyes wide with manufactured terror. Think about what you are doing to us. You are a risk auditor. You understand the devastating consequences of a public scandal. If you contest this sale, if you call the authorities, your father will go to federal prison for fraud. Is that what you truly want? Do you really want to see your own flesh and blood locked in a jail cell? I tried to pull my arm away, but her grip was surprisingly strong, like a vice clamping down on my wrist. He committed massive fraud, Mom. He stole from his own daughter. He did it for the family. She cried, tears welling up in her eyes, perfectly on command. He did it to protect our good name, our legacy in this town. If he goes to prison, the company collapses completely. Hundreds of innocent people will lose their jobs. Skylar and Terrence will lose everything they have. The Sinclair family name will be ruined forever, and it will be entirely your fault. You will be the one who destroyed this family. How could you be so incredibly selfish? The gaslighting was so intense, so deeply ingrained in our toxic family dynamic, that for a split second the old conditioned guilt actually flared in my chest. Terrence stepped closer, leaning over me. His voice dropped into a dark, threatening register. Let us look at the bigger picture here, Madeline. You work for one of the top financial auditing firms in the country. I will make sure your professional reputation is ruined forever. You deal in risk, Madeline. Terrence continued, his voice dropping to a harsh, menacing whisper that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet of the dining room. Imagine the risk to your career when I make a few well-placed phone calls to your senior partners. I will tell them that their top auditor is currently under investigation for attempting to extort her own family over a contested estate. I will drag your name through the mud until no reputable financial firm in this country will ever trust you with their ledgers again. You will be unemployable. My father nodded in agreement, his chest puffed out with a sickening mix of pride and desperation. He reached into the leather briefcase Terrence had left open on the table and pulled out another document. This one was printed on thick, formal paper, and he slapped it down right beside the forged power of attorney. This is a retroactive consent and release form, he commanded, tapping the signature line with his heavy gold pen. The title company needs this to finalize the transfer and release the escrow funds fully. You are going to sign it right now, Madeline. You are going to sign it, and you are going to walk away, and we are going to put this ugly little misunderstanding behind us. I stared at the pen, then at the faces of the people who were supposed to be my family. They had completely cornered me. Beatrice tightened her painful grip on my arm, her manicured nails digging deep enough to leave crescent-shaped bruises. Skylar stepped closer, cutting off my path to the hallway, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. Why do you always have to make everything so incredibly difficult, Maddie? My sister sneered, her voice dripping with venom. You have always been so utterly selfish. You sit up there in your comfortable apartment with your boring, stable husband, judging all of us. Dad is just trying to save the legacy he built from the ground up, and you are standing in the way because of your greedy obsession with a piece of land you never even visited. It is disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself. My mother nodded vigorously, adding her own layer of guilt to the suffocating atmosphere. Skylar is absolutely right, she insisted, her voice trembling with practiced theatrical emotion. We are your family. We gave you everything. We clothed you. We fed you. We gave you the Sinclair name. And this is how you repay us, by trying to send your own father to prison, by trying to ruin your sister's future. Just pick up the pen and sign the document, Madeline. Do the right thing for once in your miserable, ungrateful life. I looked around the room, evaluating my precarious situation with the cold, calculating precision of a seasoned risk auditor. I was physically outnumbered and emotionally ambushed. If I flatly refused to sign the document right now, they would escalate. Terrence might actually make those phone calls, and my father was desperate enough to try something even more legally reckless. I needed to get out of this house immediately. I needed to get to my car, get to Owen, too, and speak with my estate attorney before they could do any more damage. I needed a tactical retreat, so I gave them exactly what they expected to see from the weak, submissive daughter they thought they knew so well. I let my shoulders slump. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I let my eyes widen with genuine-looking panic, drawing on the years of anxiety they had instilled in me to fuel my performance. My hands began to shake visibly as I reached for the edge of the mahogany table to steady myself. I let out a choked, desperate sob, letting the tears spill over my eyelashes and run down my cheeks. I cannot breathe. I gasped, clutching at my chest, as if my heart was physically failing me. I cannot do this right now. Everything is moving too fast. Please, I just need a minute. I need to process all of this. You are taking away the only thing Grandpa ever gave me. My mother stepped back, slightly repulsed by my sudden emotional display. My father looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Skylar just rolled her eyes, muttering something about me being pathetic. I sank into one of the heavy dining chairs, burying my face in my hands, sobbing loudly into my palms. Please, Dad. I begged, my voice muffled and broken. I will not stop the sale. I will not call the police. I just need some time to grieve. Please give me 48 hours. Just 48 hours to process the loss of my grandparents' legacy before I sign it all away forever. I promise I will not cause a scene. I just need time to accept it. The room fell into a heavy, tense silence, broken only by the sound of my theatrical weeping. Terrence scoffed loudly, clearly disgusted by my display of weakness. He snatched the release form off the table. Fine, he spat, his voice laced with absolute contempt. You have until Friday. We are hosting the annual family charity gala on Friday night. You will show up, you will smile for the cameras, and you will sign this paper in my private office before the main dinner begins. If you do not, I will initiate the smear campaign on Monday morning. Your career will be dead by noon. Do we have a deal? I nodded frantically, keeping my face hidden in my hands as I mumbled my agreement. I stood up on trembling legs, grabbed my purse, and ran for the door. The heavy door slammed shut behind me. As I walked down the stone steps toward the driveway, my tears instantly vanished. My breathing leveled out perfectly. A cold, calm smile touched my lips. The trap was set. The crisp morning air hit my face as I walked down the sweeping cobblestone driveway. I kept my posture deliberately slumped until I rounded the tall hedges shielding the street from view. The moment I was out of their sightline, my spine straightened. My breathing deepened, returning to a normal, measured rhythm. I approached our modest sedan parked quietly at the curb. Owen was sitting in the driver's seat, his eyes fixed on the front door I had just exited. When I slid into the passenger seat beside him, the heavy thud of the door sealed us inside our own private sanctuary. Owen turned to me instantly, his warm brown eyes scanning my face. He knew my family better than anyone else did, having spent the last 10 years watching them systematically attempt to diminish my worth. He saw the faint redness around my eyes from the fake tears I had forced moments earlier. His jaw tightened in immediate instinctual defense. "What did they do?" he asked, his voice low and steady, but laced with a protective edge. "What exactly happened in that dining room, Madeline?" I took a deep breath, letting the scent of his cedar cologne ground me in reality. "They did exactly what we thought they would do." I began smoothing out my skirt. "But they went so much further than simply asking me to sell." I turned slightly in my seat to face him fully. "My father did not just ask for my permission to sell the coastal property. He presented me with a cashier check for $100,000 and announced that the sale had already been finalized." Owen blinked in confusion. "How is that even possible?" he asked, shaking his head. "You are the sole legal owner on the deed. The title company would never clear a transfer without your explicit notarized consent." "That is where Terrence comes in," I explained, feeling a cold knot of anger form in my chest. Terrence marched into the room like a conquering hero. He slid a general power of attorney across the table. It completely signed over all my financial and legal rights regarding the estate directly to my father. Owen stared at me, the confusion in his eyes rapidly transforming into a bright, burning fury. "But you never signed anything like that," he stated, his voice rising in volume. I nodded slowly, holding his gaze. "Exactly. They forged my signature, Owen. They forged it flawlessly. And Terrence used that fraudulent document to broker a fast cash sale to an anonymous investment group for $2.5 million. He effectively stole half the property value to secure a massive broker commission for himself, and funneled the rest to my father to save his failing manufacturing firm." Owen gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned stark white. His breathing hitched as the criminal reality of my family actions truly sank in. "That is a massive felony, Madeline," he said, his voice shaking with absolute rage. "They cannot do this to you. I will not let them do this to you." He immediately reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering aggressively over the screen. "I am calling the police right now. We are putting an end to this today. They are all going to prison." I reached across the center console and placed my hand gently but firmly over his, stopping his thumb from dialing the emergency number. "No," I said, my voice calm, projecting the analytical control I used every single day in my career as a risk auditor. "We are not calling the police. Not yet." Owen looked at me as if I had suddenly lost my mind. "Maddie? They just committed real estate fraud and forged your signature on a binding legal document to steal your inheritance. We have to report this before the title officially clears. If we do not stop them now, the money will be gone, and it will take years of brutal litigation to get it back." I offered him a small, reassuring smile. "I promise you the money is not going anywhere," I whispered, feeling the thrilling weight of the secret I had been holding on to. "And neither is the property." I pulled my sleek silver laptop from my tote bag, setting it carefully on my lap. I typed in my password, opening a secure encrypted folder on my desktop. I double-clicked on a highly confidential PDF document and turned the screen slightly so Owen could see it clearly. "Look at the date at the very top of this page," I instructed him, pointing to the official stamp embossed in the upper right corner. Owen leaned in closer, his eyes scanning the formal legal text. He read the date aloud. "Yesterday." It was stamped yesterday afternoon. I nodded, letting the profound satisfaction of my strategic foresight wash over me. Exactly 24 hours ago, I officially transferred the coastal estate deed into an irrevocable trust. Owen read the bold black letters dominating the center of the document. The Maddie Trust, he read slowly. What exactly does this mean? Because the property is in a trust, I explained, feeling a fierce thrill building in my chest. The power of attorney Terence forged is legally useless. The sale is entirely void. Owen let out a breathless laugh. You outplayed them. But why play along inside the house? Because stopping them now is not enough, I said, my voice dropping into a cold register. We are going to let Terence and Harrison dig their own graves. Then we will push them directly into those open graves ourselves today. Owen smiled, a dark, predatory expression settling over his normally gentle features. I watched him turn the key in the ignition, bringing the engine to a quiet, steady hum. He shifted the car into gear, his grip on the steering wheel relaxing into pure, confident anticipation. Let us get to work, he whispered. The drive to my office felt faster than usual. My mind was parsing through data structures and public registries before I stepped into the elevator. When I walked onto the 42nd floor of my firm, the familiar hum of servers and muted conversations settled over me like a comforting blanket. This was my domain. In the sprawling suburbs of Connecticut, my family treated me like a naive, obedient child they could easily manipulate. But up here, overlooking the city skyline, I was a senior risk auditor. I specialized in dismantling complex financial frauds, tracing hidden assets, and finding the invisible threads connecting shell corporations to white-collar criminals. My family had no idea the kind of predator they had just invited into their lives. I sat down at my desk, a sleek glass surface dominated by 3 large monitors. I placed my coffee down, cracked my knuckles, and opened my secure auditing software. It was time to hunt. I started with Terence. I pulled up the public licensing records for his luxury real estate brokerage, mapping out his recent transactions, his associated escrow accounts, and the corporate entities he frequently partnered with. Terence was arrogant, which usually meant he was sloppy. He operated in a world of high-end networking and expensive lunches, relying on charm and fast-talking to close deals. He was not a forensic accountant. He did not know how to hide his digital footprints from someone trained to see the indentations. I accessed the pending property transfer records for the county. There it was. The fraudulent sale of my grandparents' coastal estate filed just hours ago. The listed buyer was an entity called Ocean View Holdings Limited. Terence had described them as an anonymous investment group looking for a fast cash deal. I highlighted the company name and began running it through state and federal corporate registries. The company was freshly minted, registered in Delaware just 3 weeks prior. Delaware is notoriously friendly to shell corporations, allowing owners to hide behind registered agents and corporate veils. It was a classic move for someone trying to obscure their identity while acquiring substantial assets. But a corporate veil is just a piece of paper, and paper always leaves a trail. I dug deeper, bypassing the basic public searches and tapping into the specialized financial databases my firm utilized for corporate due diligence. I cross-referenced the registered agent of Ocean View Holdings with Terence and his known business associates. Nothing immediately flagged, so I shifted my focus to the money. A $2.5 million cash transaction leaves a significant wake. I traced the routing numbers associated with the escrow deposit back to its originating financial institution. Then I pulled the tax identification numbers linked to the Delaware registration. That is when the first crack in his pristine facade appeared. The tax identification number for the shell company was linked to a secondary holding company, which was in turn registered to a post office box in Manhattan. A post office box I recognized instantly because I had mailed Skylar a birthday gift there last month. A cold, sharp smile spread across my face as I ran the final query. The screen loaded, populating the true corporate structure of Ocean View Holdings Limited. The sole proprietor, the singular managing director holding 100% of the executive voting rights, was Terence Banks. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, letting the sheer magnitude of the betrayal wash over me. The revelation was almost breathtaking in its profound greed. Terrence was not just stealing from me, he was actively, systematically stealing from my father. Harrison Sinclair, blinded by his desperate need to save his failing manufacturing firm, had trusted his charming son-in-law to broker the sale of my inheritance. He believed Terrence was liquidating a $5 million asset for $2.5 million just to secure fast cash from anonymous investors. But there were no anonymous investors. Terrence was using my father and his absolute desperation against him. He was using the forged power of attorney to essentially sell the property to himself at a 50% discount. His plan was brutally simple and incredibly lucrative. Once the title cleared and the property was safely hidden inside his shell company, Terrence would immediately flip the estate on the open market for its true $5 million value. He would hand my father the $2.5 million to keep the manufacturing firm afloat, securing his position as the family's savior. Meanwhile, Terrence and Skylar would quietly pocket the remaining $2.5 million in hidden, untraceable profit. They were going to use my grandparents' legacy to fund their lavish Manhattan lifestyle, buying sports cars and designer clothes with the money they skimmed right off the top of my father and his ruin. They thought they were so smart. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect victimless crime, assuming I was too timid to fight back, and my father was too arrogant to double-check the paperwork. I looked at the data glowing on my monitors, the raw, undeniable proof of their collective treachery. They had underestimated me in the most fatal way possible. They saw a quiet, compliant daughter. They did not see the apex predator sitting behind the screen. I saved the documents, downloading the corporate registries, the tax routing numbers, and the escrow deposit confirmations into a newly encrypted file on my hard drive. I labeled the file Sinclair Liquidation. My family wanted to play a high-stakes game of financial deception. They wanted to forge signatures and hide behind shell corporations. I was going to let them believe their flawless plan was working perfectly. I was going to let them spend the money they thought they had secured. And then, when they were standing at the very edge of the cliff congratulating themselves on a job well done, I was going to gladly push them over. The local coffee shop near my office was a quiet place, usually filled with students studying and teachers grading papers. It was exactly the kind of establishment Terrence despised. When Owen walked in that Tuesday afternoon, he ordered his usual black coffee and sat at a small wooden table near the back window. 10 minutes later, the bells above the door chimed, and Terrence strode into the room. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that loudly screamed Wall Street, his polished leather shoes clicking sharply against the scuffed linoleum floor. He looked around the cafe with an expression of profound distaste, his nose slightly wrinkled, as if the smell of roasted beans and old paper offended his refined sensibilities. He spotted Owen in the corner and walked over, not bothering to offer a greeting or a handshake. He simply pulled out the metal chair across from my husband and sat down heavily, resting his expensive leather briefcase on the table between them. "Let us skip the pleasantries," Terrence began, his voice a low rumble designed to intimidate. "I am a busy man, and I do not have time to waste in places like this. I called you here because we need to discuss your wife and her little emotional breakdown yesterday morning." Owen took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee, keeping his shoulders slumped and his gaze carefully lowered. He had promised me he would play the part perfectly, and my husband was a master of restraint. He placed the mug back on the table, offering a convincing sigh of exhaustion. "What is there to discuss?" Owen asked softly. "She is devastated, Terrence. You all completely blindsided her with that forgery." Terrence let out a harsh, barking laugh, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "Blindsided her. Please, we did her a massive favor. We did you a favor, Owen. Let us be brutally honest for a second. You are a high school history teacher. You make $60,000 a year if you are lucky. You drive an old sedan and grade papers on weekends to make ends meet. That coastal property was wasted on people like you. Elite assets belong in the hands of people who understand how the real world operates, people who know how to leverage capital to build empires. You and Madeline were just sitting on a gold mine, completely paralyzed by your own middle-class mediocrity. I took action because action is what separates the winners from the losers in this life. Owen swallowed hard, mimicking the demeanor of a man thoroughly beaten down by a superior force. He looked away, staring out the window at the gray afternoon sky. "That does not make stealing right, Terence." He mumbled, his voice devoid of any real fight. "It does not matter what you think is right," Terence snapped, leaning forward and dropping his voice to a menacing whisper. "What matters is that the title company needs that retroactive release form signed, and they need it signed before Friday. I do not have time to wait for your wife to finish her pathetic grieving process. I have investors breathing down my neck. I have millions of dollars tied up in escrow accounts that need to be cleared immediately. You are going to go home. You are going to sit Madeline down, and you are going to make her sign that document tonight. If you fail to do this, I will personally ensure that your wife loses her corporate job, and I will hire a legal team to bury you both in so much litigation debt you will be paying it off for the rest of your miserable lives. Do you understand me, Owen? You need to control your wife before I decide to completely destroy her." Owen took another slow sip, hiding the fierce anger burning in his chest behind the ceramic rim of his mug. He knew exactly what he needed to say to lock the trap securely into place. "I cannot make her sign it tonight," Terence Owen said, allowing a tremor of genuine-sounding anxiety to slip into his words. "She is a total wreck. She has not stopped crying since we left the house yesterday. She feels completely betrayed by her parents. If I push her right now, she might actually snap and call the authorities just out of pure spite. You have to give her the time you promised. If you corner her today, she will fight back. But if you just let her breathe until the gala on Friday, she will cave. She always caves to her father when she is in a public setting. She does not want to ruin the family name any more than you do. She told me this morning that she plans to bring the signed document to the charity dinner just to get this whole nightmare over with. You just have to be patient." "She is broken, Terence. Her spirit is completely crushed. You won." Terence stared at Owen for a long, calculating moment. His massive ego absorbed the false narrative like a sponge. Hearing that I was completely broken, that I was crying uncontrollably in my apartment, fed the toxic superiority he craved. A slow, deeply satisfied smirk spread across his face. He patted his leather briefcase, savoring the taste of his imagined victory over the weak middle-class couple sitting before him. "Good," Terence said, standing up and buttoning his expensive suit jacket with a final dismissive gesture. "Make sure she brings that document to the gala on Friday night. If she tries any funny business, I will end her career. Tell her to wear something nice so she does not embarrass us." Terence turned and walked out of the coffee shop, the bell chiming cheerfully above the door. Owen watched him strut down the sidewalk to his illegally parked sports car. My husband took one final slow sip of his coffee, smiling quietly into the strangely empty room. While Owen secured the illusion of our defeat, I sat in my office watching my sister celebrate a victory that did not exist. Skylar had never been able to keep a secret, especially not one that involved money. By Wednesday morning, her social media had transformed into a glittering broadcast of unadulterated greed. I pulled up her Instagram stories, watching her financial recklessness unfold in real time. The first video featured her squealing with delight while gripping the steering wheel of a brand new slate gray Porsche. Her caption proudly declared she was treating herself to a $150,000 upgrade because elite energy requires elite transportation. The subsequent posts were a dizzying blur of luxury. She filmed herself sipping champagne in a high-end Fifth Avenue jeweler, modeling a diamond tennis bracelet and a matching emerald necklace. She posted photos of designer shopping bags stacked high in the back seat of her new sports car. She was spending money with the frantic, insatiable hunger of someone who believed they had just won the lottery. But I already knew the absolute truth. I had audited the financial pathways of Terence and his shell company. They did not have $2.5 million in liquid cash. They were floating this entire extravagant lifestyle on the promise of the upcoming flip. Terrence had secured short-term high-interest bridge loans to fund Skylar, using the pending contract on my coastal estate as collateral. These predatory loans came with catastrophic penalty clauses if the primary deal fell through. Skylar was not spending her own wealth. She was spending borrowed money at exorbitant interest rates, entirely dependent on a real estate transaction that was already legally void. I closed her social media feed and leaned back in my chair. A purely analytical part of my brain wanted to see this beautiful disaster in person. I checked the location tag on her most recent post. She was currently at a notoriously exclusive designer boutique just 3 blocks from my auditing firm. I checked my watch, noted it was my lunch hour, and took a short walk. The air outside was crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of my parents' dining room. I walked into the designer boutique, the heavy glass door gliding shut tightly behind me, instantly sealing out the loud city noise. The pristine interior smelled strongly of expensive leather and fresh white lilies. Skylar was standing in the center of the showroom, surrounded by 3 fawning sales associates holding up various silk garments and designer handbags. She was holding a glittering silver clutch, examining herself in a floor-to-ceiling mirror. When she caught my reflection behind hers, she whipped around her eyes, narrowing with instant vicious delight. "Madeline," she loudly announced, her voice piercing the quiet elegance of the boutique. "What on earth are you doing in a place like this? Are you lost?" The sales associates turned to look at me, their expressions polite but carefully guarded. I was wearing my standard professional attire, a tailored navy blazer and sensible heels, standing in stark contrast to Skylar and her brightly colored brand-new designer outfit. "I just came in to browse Skylar," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and pleasant. "It is nice to see you having such a productive afternoon." Skylar let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the mirrored walls. "Browsing is probably all you can afford to do, Maddie," she sneered, stepping closer to me so the entire staff could hear every single word. "You should probably head back to your little cubicle. This store does not really cater to boring middle-class auditors who just lost their entire inheritance. Maybe there is a discount rack down the street that fits your current budget." The sales associates exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly horrified by the blatant familial hostility, but unwilling to intervene with a customer who was actively spending thousands of dollars. Skylar smiled triumphantly, tossing her hair over her shoulder. She turned back to the staff, waving her hand dismissively in my direction. "Do not worry about my sister," she instructed them loudly. "She is just a little bitter because my husband and my father had to step in and manage some family assets she was too incompetent to handle. Now please ring up these 3 bags and the silk trench coat. Put it on the black card." The sheer audacity of her public insult would have crushed me a week ago. I would have felt my face burn with shame. I would have quietly turned around and fled the store in tears exactly as she wanted. But today I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, chilling sense of calm. I looked at the sleek black credit card she handed to the cashier. I knew the exact terms of the bridge loan attached to that piece of plastic. I knew that by Friday night that card would be declined, the sports car would be targeted for immediate repossession, and the crushing weight of the penalty interest would bankrupt her and Terrence completely. So I did not argue. I did not defend my career or my bank account. I simply stood there and offered my younger sister a warm, radiant, and entirely genuine smile. "Enjoy your beautiful new things, Skylar," I said softly, my voice devoid of any malice or anger. "You look absolutely stunning today. I hope you cherish every single moment of this shopping trip." Before she could process the strange, serene lack of resistance in my response, I turned around and walked out of the boutique. The heavy glass door closed behind me, leaving her to bask in the hollow glory of her borrowed wealth. I stepped back onto the bustling pavement, my mind already shifting to the next phase of the operation. My sister was gleefully sprinting toward a financial slaughterhouse, and I was going to make sure the doors were locked right behind her. I left the luxury shopping district behind and hailed a cab to the financial district. Owen was already waiting for me in the lobby of an imposing glass and steel skyscraper in Manhattan. We walked together to the elevator banks, his hand resting reassuringly on my lower back. Our destination was the 47th floor home to the offices of Mr. Gallagher, an estate attorney whose reputation for absolute ruthlessness was legendary in corporate circles. He was not a family lawyer who aimed for mediation and warm feelings. He was a legal shark, a man you hired when you wanted to completely dismantle your opposition. When we stepped into his expansive corner office, Mr. Gallagher was standing by the window. He was a tall, sharply dressed man in his late 50s, with piercing gray eyes that seemed to analyze every micro-expression. I had sent him the digital files an hour earlier, ensuring he had time to review the chaotic mess my family had created. He gestured for us to take a seat at the long mahogany conference table already covered in printed copies of the documents I had extracted from the county databases and corporate registries. "You have had an eventful birthday week, Madeline," Mr. Gallagher said, his tone devoid of polite sugarcoating. "I reviewed the general power of attorney your father and brother-in-law filed with the county. The forgery is aesthetically decent, but legally it is a suicide note. They bypassed standard identity verification protocols, likely using a notary who owes your brother-in-law a favor." I pulled the physical copy from my briefcase and laid it on the table next to the legitimate trust documents I had executed the day prior. Owen leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished wood. "We need to know exactly how tight this trap is," he said, his voice steady and serious. "Terrence thinks he has us completely backed into a corner. He threatened to destroy Madeline and her career if she does not sign the final release forms at the family charity gala this Friday. We need absolute certainty that when this blows up, it blows up on them." Mr. Gallagher offered a thin, razor-sharp smile. He tapped a manicured finger against the stack of papers detailing the buyer side of the transaction. "The trap is not just tight, Owen. It is inescapable. Let us look at the structure of the deal Terrence orchestrated. He created Ocean View Holdings Limited as a shell company to purchase the property anonymously. Because he was so desperate to secure the asset before anyone could properly scrutinize the transaction, he drafted a highly aggressive binding purchase agreement. He wanted to lock your father in so Harrison could not back out and shop the property to a higher bidder once he realized its true value, to make the offer irresistible to your desperate father." Mr. Gallagher continued, flipping to a highlighted page in the contract. Terrence included a massive, non-refundable earnest money deposit. A standard commercial real estate transaction of this size might see a deposit of 5 to 10%. Terrence, acting through his shell company, deposited $2 million directly into the escrow account. He did this to prove extreme liquidity and guarantee a rapid closing. I felt my breath catch in my throat. $2 million. I had seen the routing numbers, but hearing the legal confirmation of the amount made the reality of his greed staggering. "Where did he get $2 million in liquid cash?" I asked, knowing the answer, but needing to hear the legal mechanics of his downfall. Mr. Gallagher pulled a secondary financial trace report. He utilized high-interest, short-term bridge loans collateralizing his own real estate brokerage and his personal assets. He borrowed the $2 million to secure the $5 million property for $2.5 million. His intention is to clear the title immediately, flip the estate on the open market, pay back the bridge loans, and pocket the remaining millions. It is a highly leveraged, incredibly dangerous maneuver that relies entirely on a flawless, rapid title transfer. Owen let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "So he has $2 million of borrowed money currently sitting in a neutral escrow account waiting for the sale to close on Friday." "Exactly," Mr. Gallagher said, his gray eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. "And this is where your brilliance comes into play, Madeline. Because you transferred the coastal estate deed into an irrevocable trust 24 hours before they forged your signature, you no longer personally own the property. The Maddie Trust owns it. Therefore, the power of attorney authorizing your father to sell the property is legally void. He cannot sell an asset you do not possess. So the sale will eventually bounce," I stated, feeling the immense weight of my strategic victory settling over me. "The title company will run their final comprehensive checks before the closing on Friday, and they will discover that the deed is held by my trust, making the transaction fraudulent." "Yes," Mr. Gallagher confirmed. But here is the beautiful part of the trap you have set. Until the title officially bounces and the fraud is formally recognized, the $2 million Terrence wired is legally locked inside that escrow account. He cannot touch it. He cannot withdraw it to pay back his bridge lenders. And according to the aggressive purchase agreement he drafted himself, if the buyer fails to execute the closing, due to fraudulent activity or funding failure, the earnest money is forfeited. I sat back in my chair, exchanging a look of profound clarity with Owen. Terrence was completely trapped. His bridge loans were maturing. His wife was currently spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on luxury cars and diamonds based on phantom wealth. The walls were closing in on them from every direction. "We will let them all proceed," I said softly. "We will just let them burn." "We will let them all proceed," I said softly. "We will just let them burn." We left Mr. Gallagher's office as the sun dipped below the Manhattan skyline, casting long shadows across the pavement. Terrence was officially handled. His greed blinded him so completely that he walked directly into a steel trap of his own making. But as Owen and I drove back to Connecticut, my mind shifted to the other half of this criminal conspiracy. My father. Harrison Sinclair had eagerly facilitated the forgery of my signature. He sold out his own daughter to save his pride and his failing manufacturing firm. Letting him simply lose the fast cash from the real estate deal was not enough. He needed to be systematically dismantled. To destroy my father, I needed to understand exactly how deep his financial rot truly went. Sinclair Manufacturing was not a publicly traded conglomerate. It was a private enterprise, which meant its internal ledgers were locked away behind closed doors. But I had spent my early 20s interning in that very building, and I knew the people who kept the machines running. I reached out to William, the senior payroll accountant, who had worked for my father for nearly 30 years. William was a quiet, meticulous man who had always treated me with genuine kindness when my parents treated me like an inconvenience. I sent him a secure, encrypted message asking for a brief, highly confidential meeting. We met on Thursday morning at a rundown diner 2 towns over from the manufacturing plant. William looked exhausted, his shoulders bowed under the weight of a secret he had been carrying for months. He slid a small silver flash drive across the sticky Formica table. He did not ask what I planned to do with it. He simply told me that the numbers had stopped making sense a year ago, and that he could no longer sleep at night, knowing what was happening to the floor workers. I took the drive, thanked him for his bravery, and promised him that the people responsible would be held fully accountable. Back in my home office, I plugged the flash drive into my isolated auditing network. The raw data populated across my screens a sprawling maze of corporate expenses, payroll deductions, and vendor payouts. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and went to work. It did not take long for my trained eyes to spot the anomalies. My father was not just a victim of a changing economy or poor market trends. He was an active, prolific criminal. The ledgers revealed a systematic bleeding of corporate assets, but the money was not going towards saving the business. It was being routed through a labyrinth of phantom consultancy fees and dummy vendor invoices directly into my mother's private offshore accounts. I tracked the dates and the amounts. A $50,000 withdrawal aligned perfectly with Beatrice's sudden decision to upgrade her country club membership to the elite platinum tier. A $75,000 transfer matched the exact week my parents took a spontaneous, luxurious vacation to the Amalfi Coast. They were funding their extravagant, superficial lifestyle using company money. But the true horror of the situation became apparent when I traced the origin of those stolen funds. My father was not just skimming from the operational budget, he was actively embezzling from the employee pension accounts. A sickening wave of absolute disgust washed over me. Harrison Sinclair was stealing the retirement savings of the blue-collar workers who had dedicated their entire lives to his company. Men and women who worked grueling shifts on the factory floor, trusting that their futures were secure, were being systematically robbed so my mother could sip vintage wine in Italy and buy designer dresses she only wore once. It was a level of moral bankruptcy that even I had not fully anticipated. My father was willing to destroy the lives of hundreds of loyal employees just to maintain the fragile, pathetic illusion of his own wealth. I spent the next 6 hours compiling a devastating, irrefutable dossier. I cross-referenced every stolen dollar with a corresponding luxury purchase made by my mother. I highlighted the fraudulent transfers, mapped the dummy accounts, and attached the official banking routing numbers. I built a comprehensive, airtight case of corporate embezzlement that would hand any federal prosecutor an effortless victory. Every single transaction was meticulously documented and backed by unassailable digital forensics. They had foolishly assumed that because they controlled the company, they controlled the narrative. They forgot that numbers tell a story that cannot be manipulated by social grace or arrogance. I then combined this financial slaughterhouse with the real estate fraud documents regarding Terrence and the forged power of attorney. The picture it painted was not just of a failing business, but of a deeply corrupt family operating a massive coordinated criminal enterprise. I printed the collection on high-quality paper, the printer sounding like a judge's gavel striking wood in an empty courtroom. I organized the crisp documents into a sleek black briefcase, snapping the metal locks shut with a deeply satisfying click that echoed through my office. I looked out my window at the darkening sky. It was Thursday night. In less than 24 hours, the Sinclair family would host their annual charity gala, inviting the city's most elite investors and socialites to witness their supposed success. They thought I was going to show up broken and defeated, ready to sign away my inheritance to save their reputations. I touched the cold leather of the briefcase. I thought about the years of being told I was not good enough, not smart enough, and not worthy of respect. They had finally given me the perfect opportunity to prove them wrong. The trap was fully loaded, the evidence was perfectly secured, and the stage was officially set for Friday night. I turned off my monitors and walked out, ready to bring their legacy crashing down. Early Thursday afternoon, as I finalized my dossier, the first domino officially fell. I sat at my desk when my private tracking software pinged with a real-time alert. The automated system at the county title office had processed the transfer request submitted by Terrence. As I had anticipated with absolute certainty, the system flagged a fatal error. A title discrepancy. The automated legal notice was immediately generated and dispatched directly to Terrence's luxury real estate brokerage inbox. The notice was cold, bureaucratic, and entirely devastating. It formally stated that the name on the forged general power of attorney did not match the current legal holding entity of the coastal estate. It required an immediate notarized signature on a retroactive consent and release form from the primary beneficiary to clear the clouded title, or the entire transaction would be legally suspended. Terrence was a man who lived on the razor-thin edge of high-interest bridge loans and massive ego. When that email arrived, his perfectly tailored world began to violently unravel. He had $2 million in borrowed capital currently trapped in a frozen escrow account, and his aggressive lenders were expecting a rapid, seamless closing by Friday afternoon. Without a clear title, the sale would bounce, the earnest money would be entirely forfeited, and his financial ruin would be absolute. The panic must have been immediate and suffocating. He did not have the luxury of time, and he certainly did not have the luxury of a backup plan. I could practically envision Terrence pacing the floor of his Manhattan office, his charismatic facade crumbling into pure desperation as he frantically dialed my father. The call came through to Harrison Sinclair while he was likely sitting in his own office, desperately trying to ignore the looming bankruptcy of his manufacturing firm. Terrence would not have politely requested assistance. He would have demanded it. He would have told my father that the anonymous buyers were threatening to walk away from the deal entirely if the title discrepancy was not resolved immediately. He would have screamed that the $2.5 million cash injection needed to save the Sinclair legacy was hanging by a singular fragile thread. My father, completely oblivious to the fact that Terrence was actually the buyer attempting to defraud him, would have absorbed that panic directly. Harrison saw his entire identity, his country club memberships, his sprawling suburban estate, and his position as the family patriarch evaporating into thin air. The intense, crushing pressure of imminent poverty makes arrogant men incredibly dangerous and wildly unpredictable. Harrison needed a scapegoat, and as always, he aimed his sights directly at me. My cell phone rang at precisely 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I took a deep, steadying breath, carefully clearing my throat to ensure my voice would sound sufficiently fragile, and pressed answer. I did not even get the chance to say hello. Madeline. What is wrong with you? My father roared into the receiver, his voice shaking with a terrifying mixture of rage and terror. Are you actively trying to destroy this family? I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear, letting his tirade fill the quiet space of my office. He did not ask how I was doing, or if I had taken the time to grieve the loss of my grandparents' legacy. He simply launched into a brutal, calculated assault. Terrence just called me from the brokerage. Harrison continued, his breathing heavy and erratic. The title company is holding up the transfer because you have not signed the retroactive consent and release form. The buyers are threatening to pull out of the deal completely, Madeline. If they walk away, the manufacturing firm goes into immediate receivership. We lose everything. Your mother and I will be out on the street, and it will be your fault entirely. You are doing this on purpose out of pure vindictive spite. You are a selfish, ungrateful child, and you need to drive over to my office right now and sign that paper. I let a few seconds of heavy, agonizing silence pass before I responded. When I finally spoke, I pitched my voice up, letting a manufactured tremor bleed into my words. I forced a wet gasp, perfectly simulating a woman teetering on the edge of a massive breakdown. Dad, please, I cried out, my voice thick with fake tears. Please do not yell at me. I am not trying to ruin anything. I am just so scared and overwhelmed. Everything is moving too fast. My father did not soften his tone. He doubled down on the abuse. I do not care how you feel, Madeline. I need that signature today. I let out another sob, clutching my chest, as if anxiety was crushing me. I cannot leave my apartment right now, Dad. I whimpered, sounding completely broken. I cannot breathe. But I promise you I will sign it. I am not trying to destroy the family. Just let me bring it to the charity gala tomorrow night. Please, Dad. I will bring the paper to the gala and sign it in front of everyone. I will prove to you that I am a team player. Just please give me until tomorrow night to pull myself together. There was a long, tense pause on the line. I could hear my father calculating the risk. Finally, he let out a harsh, disgusted sigh. Fine, he snapped, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. You bring that document to the gala tomorrow night. You wear a decent dress, you put a smile on your miserable face, and you sign the paper. If you fail me again, Madeline, you are dead to this family. He hung up the phone without another word. I lowered the device from my ear, the fake tears instantly drying from my eyes. A cold, victorious smile spread across my face. They had taken the bait perfectly. The stage was officially set for Friday night. The Friday morning dawned very crisp and clear, completely at odds with the storm of financial ruin currently hovering directly over my parents. Today was the day of the annual Sinclair Legacy Gala. For over a decade, my mother Beatrice had treated this event as her ultimate crowning achievement. It was nominally a charity dinner intended to raise funds for local children, but in reality it was an extravagant, highly choreographed performance designed exclusively to project an illusion of untouchable wealth to their high society peers. My parents would rent out the grand ballroom of the most expensive hotel in the city, hiring string quartets and Michelin-starred caterers, all to convince the local politicians and wealthy investors that the Sinclair manufacturing empire was thriving. This year, the stakes were infinitely higher. My father needed tonight to be a flawless spectacle. He needed the investors in that room to look at him and see a confident, successful patriarch, completely unaware that his company ledgers were bleeding out and his pension funds were systematically pillaged. He needed the room to believe the lie of the $2.5 million real estate transaction so desperately that he had threatened to disown me just to force my signature. At precisely noon, a heavy knock echoed through my apartment. Owen answered the door and returned to the living room carrying a large generic cardboard delivery box. The return address was listed as my parents' sprawling suburban estate. I frowned, setting down my coffee mug, and pulled open the taped flaps. Inside, nestled beneath a single sheet of cheap tissue paper, was a dress. It was a drab, muted shade of beige constructed from a stiff, unforgiving synthetic material that felt rough against my fingertips. The cut was excessively conservative, completely shapeless, and easily 2 sizes too large for my frame. It looked like something a grieving widow might wear to a 19th-century funeral. Pinned to the collar was a small, cream-colored card written in my mother's unmistakable, sweeping cursive handwriting. I pulled the card free and read the brief, commanding message aloud to Owen. "Wear this. Blend in. Do not embarrass your sister tonight." The sheer, unadulterated disrespect radiated from the card, filling our living room with the toxic, familiar scent of my mother's lifelong manipulation. She wanted me completely invisible. I stared at the hideous beige fabric, feeling a sudden, intense wave of memories wash over me. This dress was not just a fashion insult, it was a physical manifestation of my entire childhood. For as long as I could remember, Beatrice had actively forced me into the shadows, so Skylar could bathe in the spotlight. When I was 16 and attending the winter formal, my mother had forced me to wear a dull, oversized navy gown, while she spent $2,000 on a custom sparkling silver dress for Skylar. When family friends came over for dinner parties, I was instructed to stay quiet, serve the appetizers, and blend into the wallpaper, while my sister entertained the guests with her piano recitals. My mother had always viewed my existence as a competitive threat to her golden child. She needed me to be plain forgettable and entirely submissive, ensuring that the brilliant, beautiful Skylar would never have to share the stage. She thought she could still dictate my wardrobe and my behavior from 30 miles away. She truly believed that sending a cheap, off-the-rack dress would automatically condition me to lower my head and shuffle quietly into the background of her glittering charity gala. I looked at Owen, who was watching me with a mixture of concern and rising anger. I did not say a word. I simply gathered the stiff, ugly beige fabric in my hands, walked directly into the kitchen, and shoved the entire dress forcefully into the bottom of the trash can. I tossed the cream-colored note right on top of it. I was done blending in. I walked into my bedroom and unzipped the protective garment bag hanging on the back of my closet door. Inside was the dress I had personally commissioned 3 weeks ago to celebrate my promotion to senior risk auditor. It was a breathtaking, custom-tailored emerald green gown. The silk moved like liquid glass, gathering elegantly at the waist before cascading down to the floor. It was vibrant, powerful, and utterly unapologetic. It was the exact opposite of everything my mother wanted me to be. I spent the next 2 hours preparing myself with meticulous, deliberate care. I pinned my dark hair up into a sleek, commanding twist, applied a sharp, flawless layer of makeup, and slipped into the emerald gown. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see the quiet, obedient daughter who had cried in the dining room the day before. I saw a woman who dismantled corporate frauds for a living. I saw an apex predator ready to strike. I walked back into my home office and picked up the sleek black leather briefcase resting on my desk. I popped the metal latches, verifying the contents one final time. The certified, notarized documents proving the existence of the Maddie Trust rested perfectly on the left side. The devastating, heavily researched financial dossier detailing my father's extensive corporate embezzlement sat securely on the right. Every single page was a loaded weapon, ready to be fired. I snapped the briefcase shut, the sound sharp and final in the quiet apartment. Owen walked into the room, dressed in a sharp black suit, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance. "You look absolutely incredible," he murmured, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. "Are you ready for this?" I gripped the leather handle of my briefcase, feeling the immense, undeniable weight of the justice I was about to deliver. I looked at my wonderful husband and smiled. I have been ready for this exact moment my entire life. Let us finally go out now. The drive to the Grand Hotel in the center of the city was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic passing of streetlights. Owen held my hand the entire way, his thumb gently tracing circles on my skin. When we pulled up to the sweeping entrance of the venue, a valet in a crisp uniform opened my door. I stepped out, the emerald silk of my gown catching the warm glow of the oversized crystal chandeliers visible through the massive glass doors. We walked into the grand foyer, and the sheer scale of my parents' financial deception was immediately apparent. The Sinclair Legacy Gala was in full swing, and it was a masterclass in aggressive, fraudulent opulence. Waiters in white coats circulated with trays of expensive champagne and caviar. The room was packed with the city elite. I recognized local politicians shaking hands with prominent real estate developers and wealthy investors laughing at jokes told by my father and his business partners. It was a room overflowing with people whose respect and capital my father desperately needed to maintain his crumbling empire. I stood at the top of the grand staircase descending into the ballroom, taking a moment to survey the crowd. My mother had always used these events to cement her status as the untouchable matriarch of our community. Tonight was supposed to be her ultimate triumph, the night she proved the Sinclair family was stronger and wealthier than ever. I scanned the sea of designer suits and expensive dresses until I spotted her. Beatrice was holding court near a massive ice sculpture wearing a severe black gown that screamed of manufactured elegance. She was laughing politely at a joke told by a city councilman, playing the role of the gracious hostess to absolute perfection. And then she turned her head and saw me. I watched the polite, practiced smile slide right off her face, replaced instantly by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. She had expected a broken, defeated daughter shuffling into the room in a hideous beige sack, eager to hide in the corners and sign away her inheritance just to escape the public eye. Instead, she saw a confident, radiant woman in a custom emerald gown that commanded the attention of everyone in our immediate vicinity. Several heads turned to look at me, and I offered them a warm, gracious smile as Owen and I began our descent down the staircase. I could see the panic rising in my mother. I was ruining her carefully curated aesthetic, pulling the spotlight away from the narrative she had so meticulously constructed. Beatrice excused herself from the councilman with a frantic, jerky movement and practically sprinted across the ballroom floor to intercept us. She reached me just as I stepped off the final stair, her hands reaching out to grab my arm, with the same bruising, desperate grip she had used in the dining room the day before. "Madeline, what on earth are you wearing?" she hissed, her voice trembling with barely contained rage as she tried to physically pull me toward a secluded hallway leading to the service elevators. "I sent you a dress. You are supposed to blend in. You are drawing completely the wrong kind of attention. We need to get you into a back room right this second before you embarrass this entire family." I planted my feet firmly on the marble floor, refusing to be moved a single inch. I gently but firmly pried her manicured fingers off my arm. "I think the dress you sent must have gotten lost in the mail, Mom," I said smoothly, keeping my tone perfectly pleasant for the benefit of the surrounding guests. "And I have no intention of hiding in a back room tonight. I am here to celebrate the family legacy, just like you asked." Before Beatrice could launch into another desperate, manipulative tirade, a new figure shoved his way through the crowd. Terrence appeared, and the confident, arrogant real estate shark I had seen yesterday was entirely gone. He looked completely unhinged. His expensive suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie was slightly loosened, and a heavy sheen of sweat coated his forehead. The automated notice from the title company had clearly destroyed his ability to sleep or function. His predatory bridge loans were coming due, his $2 million deposit was trapped in a frozen escrow account, and he was staring down the barrel of absolute, unmitigated bankruptcy. He did not care about my mother and her social anxieties or my emerald dress. He only cared about his own survival. He pushed past Beatrice, completely ignoring her shocked gasp, and stepped directly into my personal space. He shoved a heavy leather portfolio into my hands, followed immediately by a shiny gold pen. "Madeline, sign the papers right now," Terrence demanded, his voice a frantic, breathless whisper that carried a terrifying undercurrent of raw desperation. "I have the retroactive release forms right here. You promised you would sign them tonight. The title company needs this uploaded to their portal before midnight or the entire transaction collapses. Do not play games with me tonight. Just sign the damn documents so we can all move on." I looked down at the documents resting in the leather portfolio. This was the moment they thought they had won. They thought they had finally broken me down enough to steal everything I had. I slowly took the gold pen from his trembling hand, feeling the cool metal against my skin. I looked up, meeting his terrified, bloodshot eyes with a gaze of absolute chilling calm. I smiled, letting my voice carry just enough for my mother and Terrence to hear the total certainty in my tone. "I think this deserves to be signed on stage," I told him softly. A true family legacy moment. Terrence, who was entirely blinded by his own profound greed and suffocating desperation, eagerly nodded his sweaty head in absolute agreement. Terrence eagerly nodded his sweaty head in absolute agreement. He was so consumed by his impending financial doom that the theatrical absurdity of my request did not even register as a threat. He just saw a clear path to his salvation. He quickly ushered Owen and me toward the massive double doors leading into the main dining hall, gesturing frantically for a passing waiter to take our coats. The grand ballroom was a masterclass in aggressive manufactured luxury. Hundreds of crystal centerpieces caught the ambient light, casting a shimmering glow over the wealthy investors, politicians, and socialites. They were all seated at perfectly arranged tables, completely oblivious to the fact that the entire event was funded by stolen employee pensions. A soft chime echoed through the sophisticated sound system, signaling the end of the cocktail hour and the beginning of the evening formal program. The low hum of elite conversation gradually quieted down as the room directed its collective attention toward the elevated stage at the front of the hall. The stage was draped in heavy velvet, flanked by enormous floral arrangements that smelled faintly of desperation and wilted promises. A spotlight cut through the dimness, illuminating the sleek acrylic podium. My father, Harrison Sinclair, stepped into the light. He looked every inch the powerful, unbothered corporate patriarch he pretended to be. He wore a bespoke tuxedo that fit him flawlessly, his silver hair swept back with aristocratic precision. He offered the crowd a warm, charismatic smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, projecting an aura of absolute stability and generational wealth. The applause was immediate and respectful. These people believed in the Sinclair name because my father had spent decades ensuring the facade never slipped. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," Harrison began, his voice a rich, booming baritone that commanded the massive room with practiced ease. "We are gathered here to celebrate the enduring legacy of the Sinclair family and our unwavering commitment to this wonderful city. But tonight is also a celebration of resilience. In the world of business, we are often faced with shifting tides and unpredictable markets. True leadership is not about avoiding the storm. It is about navigating through it and emerging stronger, more agile, and more prosperous than ever before." He paused, letting his words wash over the wealthy investors sitting in the front rows. These were the men and women he desperately needed to impress the people whose capital kept his fragile empire from entirely collapsing. I stood near the back of the room with Owen clutching my black leather briefcase, watching my father spin his web of corporate deceit. "I am exceptionally proud to announce that Sinclair Manufacturing has just finalized a highly lucrative strategic asset liquidation." Harrison continued, his tone swelling with manufactured pride. "This morning we completed the sale of the historic Sinclair coastal estate. It was a difficult, emotional decision to part with a piece of our family history, but in business, nostalgia must always yield to progress. This multi-million-dollar transaction has injected massive liquidity into our corporate reserves, allowing us to expand our manufacturing operations and secure our position as an industry leader for decades to come." The crowd erupted into polite congratulatory applause. They had no idea the company was actively bleeding out, or that the real estate transaction he was boasting about was a fraudulent scheme built on a forged signature. My father soaked in their admiration, feeding off the validation like a starving man. He raised his hand to quiet the room, his smile widening into an expression of profound, arrogant satisfaction. But a patriarch is only as strong as the family standing behind him, Harrison said, pivoting smoothly to the next phase of his performance. And this monumental deal would not have been possible without the brilliant, tireless work of my son-in-law. Please join me in welcoming the man who brokered this incredible transaction, the true savior of the Sinclair family legacy tonight, Terrence Banks. The spotlight widened to include the edge of the stage. Terrence practically sprinted up the carpeted steps, his previous frantic desperation temporarily masked by a veneer of slick, practiced humility. He shook my father's hand vigorously, pulling him into a brief masculine embrace designed exclusively for the photographers standing near the stage. Terrence stepped up to the podium, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead, looking out at the sea of wealthy investors with hungry, predatory eyes. He believed that the $2 million locked in escrow was just moments away from being released. "Thank you, Harrison," Terrence said into the microphone, his voice smooth and confident. "It is an absolute honor to leverage my real estate expertise for the good of this family." We moved swiftly, we found the perfect anonymous buyers, and we secured a deal that ensures the Sinclair name remains synonymous with unmatched success. But as Harrison said, family is a team effort. Terrence looked directly at me across the crowded ballroom, his eyes flashing with a silent, threatening command. "And tonight we have one final piece of business to conclude to officially seal this historic transaction." Harrison stepped back up to the microphone, his gaze locking onto mine. He looked at me not as a daughter, but as a minor inconvenience he was finally squashing under his expensive shoe. "For years my eldest daughter has preferred to stay out of the spotlight," Harrison announced to the room, his tone dripping with heavy, unmistakable condescension. "She has lived a quiet, simple life as an auditor, staying far away from the heavy burdens of the corporate world. But tonight my shy, quiet daughter is finally stepping up. She is finally doing her part to protect and serve the Sinclair name. Ladies and gentlemen, Madeline Sinclair." The polite applause slowly rippled through the room. Owen gently squeezed my hand. I adjusted my grip on my briefcase, stepped forward in my emerald gown, and walked directly up to the waiting microphone. The microphone stand felt cool beneath my fingertips as I adjusted it. I looked out over the sea of expectant faces. Hundreds of influential people were staring back at me, their expressions a mixture of polite curiosity and mild impatience. They were waiting for the obedient daughter to play her part to sign away her inheritance and cement the false narrative my father had carefully constructed. To my left, my father stood with a tight, encouraging smile that did not reach his eyes. To my right, Terrence was practically vibrating with nervous energy. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, and aggressively pushed the heavy leather portfolio onto the sleek, acrylic podium. He unclipped his expensive gold pen and pressed it into my right hand, his sweaty fingers brushing against my skin. "Sign the papers right now, Madeline." Terrence whispered, his voice so low that the microphone did not pick it up. "Do it quickly and smile for the cameras." I looked down at the retroactive consent and release form resting perfectly in the portfolio. The document was designed to legitimize the massive fraud they had committed against me, to clear the title discrepancy, and release the $2 million Terrence had trapped in escrow. My mother, standing in the front row of the audience, gave me a sharp, commanding nod. She expected me to crumble under the weight of the public spotlight. She thought the sheer pressure of this grand ballroom would force me into total submission. I took a deep, steadying breath. I set the gold pen down on the podium. It landed with a soft, dismissive click. I reached into my small beaded clutch and retrieved a sleek silver flash drive. I looked toward the back of the massive ballroom, locking eyes with the lead technician in the audiovisual booth. I had tipped him heavily earlier to prioritize my specific digital input. I gave him a single definitive nod. The transition was instantaneous. The soft ambient background music abruptly cut off. The massive high-definition projection screen positioned directly behind the stage, which had previously displayed the Sinclair corporate logo, suddenly flickered. The corporate logo vanished entirely, replaced by a crisp, towering image of a heavily redacted but unmistakably official legal document. The sudden shift in the visual presentation caused a ripple of murmurs to sweep through the wealthy crowd. People adjusted their glasses, leaning forward in their seats, trying to comprehend the dense legal text now looming over the stage. I leaned into the microphone, my voice ringing out clear, calm, and absolutely unshakable. "I would love to sign this document for you, Dad," I said, projecting my words into every corner of the silent ballroom. "Unfortunately, I legally cannot." My father frowned, his practiced charismatic smile faltering as confusion clouded his features. He stepped closer to the podium, his voice dropping to a frantic hiss. "Madeline, what on earth are you doing? Stop playing around and sign the paper." I ignored him, keeping my gaze fixed squarely on the audience. I gestured gracefully toward the massive screen behind me. "I do not own the property anymore," I announced to the room, my voice carrying the crisp, authoritative tone of a senior risk auditor dismantling a fraudulent ledger. "The estate does not belong to me as an individual. It belongs to the legal entity displayed on the screen behind me. It belongs to the Maddie Trust." A sharp collective gasp rippled through the front rows as the local politicians and seasoned investors quickly processed the legal implications of my statement. They were not fools. They knew exactly what a trust signified in a real estate transaction. I turned to face my father and Terrence, ensuring the microphone caught every single syllable of my next sentence. "The document you see on the screen is an irrevocable trust certificate," I explained, slowly, watching the color rapidly drain from my father's face. "It is dated, stamped, and officially notarized exactly 24 hours before you and Terrence forged my signature on that general power of attorney." The word "forged" dropped into the grand ballroom like a live grenade. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke. The wealthy elite simply stared at the stage in profound, unadulterated shock. "You cannot sell an asset I do not possess," I continued, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "Therefore, the power of attorney you and Terrence manufactured in our dining room is entirely void. It is a worthless piece of paper, and the $2.5 million real estate transaction you just boasted about to this entire room is nothing more than a blatant criminal fraud." Terrence physically staggered backward as if he had been violently shoved. The sheer magnitude of his absolute ruin finally crashed down upon him. He looked up at the massive projection screen, his bloodshot eyes frantically scanning the dates and the notarized seals. He realized in that moment that his entire high-stakes gamble had failed completely. The title was not just clouded, it was definitively, permanently blocked. His $2 million earnest money deposit was officially trapped in a frozen escrow account, completely inaccessible, and his predatory bridge lenders were going to absolutely destroy his life by morning. "That is a lie!" Terrence screamed, his voice cracking with pure, unhinged panic as he lunged toward the podium. "She is lying to all of you. She is a sick, jealous woman trying to ruin her family." He reached for the microphone, his hands trembling violently, but I did not step back. I stood my ground, my emerald gown shimmering in the harsh spotlight. I looked down at the wealthy investors, the men and women my father had spent his entire life trying to impress, and I let them see the undeniable truth written across my calm, collected face. I had not ruined the Sinclair family, I had simply audited them. Their books were a catastrophic, fraudulent disaster. A collective gasp of horror ripped through the grand ballroom, followed by a chaotic wave of murmurs. The wealthy investors in the front rows, the people my father had spent the evening trying to impress, began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Terrence, whose pristine facade had melted into a mask of pure terror, let out a loud, visceral roar of denial. He lunged across the stage toward the podium, his shoes slipping on the polished floor. "She is lying," he screamed, his voice cracking as he reached desperately for the microphone stand. "Do not listen to a single word she says. She is a bitter, jealous woman trying to destroy her own family because she wants the spotlight." Before his trembling, sweaty fingers could even graze the microphone, Owen stepped out of the shadows. My husband. The man Terrence dismissed as a schoolteacher moved with the grace of a brick wall. He placed himself directly between the podium and Terrence, raising one hand in a gesture of warning. Terrence collided with Owen's shoulder, bouncing backward and staggering on his heels. Back away right now, Owen stated, his voice low, but carrying authority that echoed through the microphones. You are not going to touch her. Terrence glared at Owen, chest heaving, but the presence of my husband forced him to remain frozen in place. I did not flinch. I kept my posture straight, my hands resting lightly on the podium. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the remote control I had synced with the audiovisual booth. If I am lying, Terrence, I said, projecting my voice over the panic in the ballroom, then the footprint of your corporate transactions should prove my innocence. I pressed the button on the remote, signaling the technician at the back of the room. The projection screen behind me shifted. The image of the irrevocable trust certificate vanished, replaced by a magnified corporate registry document from the state of Delaware. I directed my gaze toward the audience, slipping into the commanding persona I utilized during boardroom presentations. As all of you were just informed by my father, I began, my tone surgical. My father sold the Sinclair Coastal Estate to an anonymous investment group known as Ocean View Holdings Limited. Terrence brokered this deal, claiming he found a desperate buyer willing to pay $2.5 million in fast cash, bypassing appraisals. I clicked the remote again. Red highlights appeared across the projected document, zooming in closely on the corporate tax identification numbers and the registered agents. In the world of risk auditing, there is no such thing as anonymity. I continued pacing my words to ensure every person here absorbed the magnitude of the betrayal. I traced the routing numbers attached to the escrow deposit. I bypassed the Delaware corporate veil and pulled the executive voting rights of the shell company. I turned to look at my father, who was standing frozen at the edge of the stage, his face devoid of color. Terrence did not find a buyer. Dad, I stated the truth, slicing through the tense air of the ballroom. He is the buyer. He forged my signature on that power of attorney to buy my $5 million property for $2.5 million. His plan was simple. He was going to use your desperation against you, quietly acquire the estate at a massive 50% discount, and then immediately flip it on the open market. He was planning to steal millions of dollars out of your pocket, Dad. He used you as the clueless pawn to execute his crime. My father stumbled backward, his hand flying to his chest as if he had been struck. He turned his horrified gaze toward Terrence, the realization of his son-in-law's treachery shattering his delusions. But the financial autopsy was not finished. I turned my attention back to Terrence, who was clutching the edge of a floral arrangement stand, gasping for air like a drowning man. His tailored suit was soaked in sweat, his eyes darting, searching for an exit that did not exist. I stepped away from the podium, moving closer to him, allowing the emerald silk of my gown to sweep across the stage. Terrence, I said softly, though the microphone caught every syllable. You drafted an aggressive purchase agreement to ensure my father could not back out of the deal. You wanted to lock him into the discounted price. To do that, you transferred a non-refundable earnest money deposit into the escrow account. $2 million in liquid cash borrowed from high-interest bridge lenders who expect repayment by tomorrow morning. Terrence let out a strangled wheeze, his knees buckling as the walls of reality closed in. And because this entire sale is fraudulent, I delivered the fatal blow. Because you attempted to purchase a property using a forged signature on a voided power of attorney, that transaction has triggered a federal hold. Your $2 million deposit is now indefinitely locked in a frozen escrow account, pending a federal fraud investigation. You cannot withdraw it. You cannot return it to your lenders. You cannot access a cent. The silence in the grand room was absolute, broken only by the pathetic sound of Terrence taking deep, hyperventilating breaths. You lost the property, Terrence, I whispered, staring down at him with a cold expression of serenity. You lost the hidden profits. You lost your reputation in front of every investor in this city. Your bridge loans are maturing right now, and you have nothing left to give them. You are completely bankrupt, Terrence. You are bankrupt, and you did it entirely to yourself. Terence collapsed to his knees, his hands gripping his hair as a sob tore from his throat. The wealthy elite in the audience stared at him with absolute disgust. The people he had spent his entire life trying to impress now looking at him like he was a contagious disease. The sickening thud of Terence hitting the floor was the only sound in the grand ballroom. Then the sudden piercing noise of shattering glass broke the silence. I looked past the edge of the stage to see my sister standing near the front row. The crystal champagne flute she had been holding lay in jagged pieces around her heels. Skylar was staring at her husband, her flawless complexion draining of color as the catastrophic reality of my words finally penetrated her vanity. The phantom wealth she had been flaunting all week had just evaporated into thin air. The reality of the high-interest bridge loans was no longer an abstract financial concept. It was a suffocating, immediate truth. Skylar had spent the last 3 days living in a delusion of limitless capital. She had purchased a $150,000 sports car, draped herself in diamonds, and paraded through luxury boutiques using credit lines that were dependent on Terence successfully closing the fraudulent sale. Without the $2 million from the escrow account, the entire house of cards was collapsing on top of her. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The manicured, confident golden child transformed instantly into a frantic, cornered animal. She shoved her way past a local politician, her expensive gown catching on a chair, as she charged toward the steps of the elevated stage. "Terence, what did you do?" Skylar shrieked, her voice tearing through the elegant room. Her usual polished demeanor was gone, replaced by a raw, unhinged panic that made her voice crack. She scrambled onto the stage, completely ignoring the stunned murmurs of the elite crowd watching her meltdown. She grabbed her husband by the collar of his suit, shaking him violently as he remained slumped on his knees. "Tell me she is lying, Terence. Tell me you have the money. I just charged hundreds of thousands of dollars to the black card. The dealership is expecting the final wire transfer for the car tomorrow. You promised me we were rich. You promised me we had millions." Terence could not even look at her. He just kept his head down, taking ragged, shallow breaths, paralyzed by the absolute certainty of his impending federal indictment. Skylar let out a sound of pure anguish, shoving him away in disgust. He fell backward onto the stage, a pathetic heap of ruined ambition. Skylar spun around to face me, her eyes wild with a toxic mixture of terror and unfiltered hatred. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, her chest heaving as she prepared to unleash decades of entitlement. "You did this to us!" Skylar screamed, taking a threatening step toward the podium. Owen immediately shifted his weight, preparing to intercept her, but I placed a gentle hand on his arm, signaling him to hold his ground. I wanted my sister to dig her grave on her own. "You are a jealous sociopath, Madeline. You have always been jealous of me. You planned this scheme just to ruin my life because you cannot stand the fact that I have everything you do not. You are trying to destroy your own family because you are a bitter, pathetic auditor who wants to drag everyone down into her miserable life." I looked down at my younger sister, feeling no anger, no sorrow, and no pity. I just felt a satisfying sense of closure. For 35 years, I had allowed this woman to diminish my worth. I had absorbed her insults, her mockery, and her cruelty, internalizing the belief that I was inferior because I refused to play their superficial games. I leaned closer to the microphone, ensuring my voice remained steady, cool, and clear. "You called me an ugly dropout who could not afford her own life," I said softly, the words echoing through the grand ballroom. I watched her eyes widen as I threw her insults back at her. "You paraded around that designer boutique on Wednesday, humiliating me in front of the staff, bragging about your elite energy. But your energy was funded by criminal fraud, Skylar. You do not have a dollar to your name. The repo men are coming for your car tomorrow. The boutique is going to decline your black card. Let us see how well you handle the middle class." Skylar opened her mouth to scream another insult, but no sound came out. The finality of my words stripped her of power. Before she could recover, my mother decided to launch her own counterattack. Beatrice scrambled up the stairs to the stage, her face twisted into a mask of agony. She threw her arms out wide, turning to face the audience of investors and socialites. She attempted to deploy the one weapon she had always used to control the narrative. She played the victim. "Please do not listen to a word she says," Beatrice cried out, tears streaming down her face as she gestured wildly toward me. "My daughter is unwell. She is mentally unstable. She has suffered from delusions for years, and she has fabricated this story to hurt her father. She needs psychiatric help, not an audience. Harrison is a good man. He would never steal from his own child. We are a loving family being held hostage by a vindictive woman. Please, you have to believe me." Beatrice waited for the room to rally around her, expecting social validation. But the elite did not offer her sympathy. They offered her reality. The crowd was already whispering. Men and women were pulling out their phones, texting their advisors, and stepping away from the stage. They were alienated by the Sinclair family and their criminality. They saw the sweat on Terrence. They saw the terror in Skylar. They saw the proof of the irrevocable trust shining on the screen behind me. My mother stood on the stage, surrounded by the fragments of her empire, screaming. I watched her social standing evaporate, savoring the perfection of their collapse. My father realized that his wife and his golden child had entirely lost control of the situation. Harrison Sinclair pushed his way past the weeping figure of my mother, his face a rigidly constructed mask of desperate authority. He smoothed the lapels of his expensive tuxedo, fighting to project the image of a seasoned corporate patriarch dealing with a minor, unfortunate domestic dispute. He approached the podium, intentionally crowding my physical space, trying to use his sheer physical presence to intimidate me into silence. "Please, ladies and gentlemen, I ask for your patience and understanding," Harrison boomed into the microphone, his rich baritone voice attempting to coat the room in a soothing layer of executive calm. "What you are witnessing tonight is nothing more than a deeply regrettable family misunderstanding regarding a highly complex real estate transaction. My son-in-law, Terrence, simply made an administrative error during the preliminary paperwork drafting phase. My daughter Madeline is understandably emotional and confused about the corporate logistics involved in estate transfers. We will resolve this private matter internally. I assure you, Sinclair Manufacturing remains as strong and lucrative as ever." He turned his head slightly, glaring up at the audiovisual booth at the back of the grand ballroom. "Cut the projection screen immediately," he barked, dropping the polite facade for a fraction of a second. I did not step away from the microphone. I did not yield a single inch of the stage. I stood my ground in my emerald gown, looking directly at the wealthy investors, local politicians, and banking partners who had funded his lavish lifestyle for decades. I held up my hand, signaling the technician in the booth to ignore my father. The image of the irrevocable trust certificate remained blazing brightly on the massive screen behind us. "Forgery is not an administrative error, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic attempt at damage control like a sharpened blade. "It is a federal crime. And no one in this room believes that Terrence accidentally faked a notary stamp and a signature to steal $5 million of property. But the real question these intelligent investors should be asking themselves right now is not how you tried to steal from your own daughter. The question they need to ask is why. Why were you so incredibly desperate for a fast cash injection of $2.5 million that you were willing to risk federal prison to get it?" Harrison froze. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He reached out his trembling fingers, hovering inches from the microphone, but he could not find the words to silence me. The wealthy elite in the audience leaned forward in their seats. The whispered conversations ceased entirely. The grand ballroom fell into a heavy, suffocating silence, anticipating the final, fatal blow. I raised the remote control in my right hand and pressed the button. The projection screen behind us flickered once more. The real estate documents vanished, replaced instantly by a sprawling, meticulously detailed spreadsheet. It was the internal financial ledger of Sinclair Manufacturing, complete with bank routing numbers, offshore account transfers, and dummy vendor payouts. I had highlighted the most damning transactions in bright, undeniable crimson. "I am a senior risk auditor," I announced to the captive audience, pointing gracefully toward the massive screen. "When I discovered the real estate fraud yesterday, I decided to run a comprehensive forensic audit on my father's privately held manufacturing firm. I needed to understand the depth of the financial rot. What you are looking at right now is the undeniable proof that Sinclair Manufacturing is not a thriving, lucrative empire. It is a hollowed-out carcass. My father is completely bankrupt. Harrison let out a choked, breathless sound, staggering backward, as if the numbers on the screen were physically assaulting him. He looked at his business partners sitting in the front row, watching their expressions shift from confusion to absolute horrified realization. But he did not just lose his corporate profits to a shifting market. I continued, my voice steady and merciless. My father has spent the last 3 years actively embezzling corporate funds to maintain the illusion of his wealth. If you look at the highlighted sections on the screen, you will see a labyrinth of phantom consultancy fees. Those fees were routed directly into offshore accounts to pay for the extravagant charity galas, the luxury sports cars, and the designer wardrobes my mother and sister are wearing tonight. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the full weight of his moral bankruptcy crash down upon the room. And he did not steal from anonymous corporate investors. He systematically drained the employee pension accounts. He stole the retirement savings of the blue-collar workers who dedicated their entire lives to his factory floor. He robbed the people who trusted him so his family could drink vintage champagne and pretend they were untouchable. The ballroom erupted into sheer chaos. Investors leaped from their seats shouting in outrage. Men in expensive suits pointed furiously at the stage, realizing their own capital was likely tied up in a massive failing Ponzi scheme. The facade of the Sinclair legacy was completely obliterated, reduced to a pile of criminal ash in front of the entire city. Harrison fell to his knees beside Terrence, gripping his chest as he stared out at the angry, shouting crowd. Beatrice continued to weep on the edge of the stage, her social empire entirely ruined. Skylar sat frozen on the floor, staring blankly at the shattered champagne glass. I looked toward the heavy double doors at the very back of the grand ballroom. Standing calmly in the doorway was Mr. Gallagher, my brilliant and ruthless estate attorney. He caught my eye across the chaotic room and gave me a single definitive nod. Mr. Gallagher pushed the heavy doors open. Uniformed police officers and federal agents marched straight into the brightly lit grand ballroom. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding thud. Mr. Gallagher stood aside, holding the door as half a dozen uniformed police officers and 2 federal agents in dark suits marched into the brightly lit space. The sudden appearance of law enforcement acted like a shockwave. The wealthy investors who had just been screaming in outrage over their stolen capital immediately backed away, creating a wide path for the authorities. The pristine Sinclair Legacy Gala had officially transformed into an active crime scene. My father, Harrison Sinclair, remained on his knees near the edge of the stage. He did not try to run. There was nowhere left to go. The men and women who had worshipped his financial acumen just an hour ago were now actively surrounding the stage, trapping him. A prominent real estate developer pointed a shaking finger at Harrison. "Where is my money?" The developer roared, his face purple with fury. "You told me the company was liquid. You stole from us to buy your wife diamonds." The crowd echoed his rage, demanding their investments back. The federal agents ignored the shouting investors, keeping their eyes locked on the men cowering on the stage. 2 police officers broke away and approached Terrence. My brother-in-law was still huddled on the floor, weeping openly, the slick real estate broker completely broken by the reality of his own greed. "Stand up, Mr. Banks," the taller officer commanded. Terrence could barely support his own weight as the officers hauled him to his trembling feet. They spun him around, pressing his chest roughly against the clear acrylic podium he had just stood behind. The metallic click of handcuffs snapping around his wrists echoed through the tense room. "Terrence Banks, you are being placed under arrest for felony forgery, wire fraud, and real estate fraud," the officer recited, reading him his rights as he patted down his tailored suit. Terrence did not protest. He just let out a long, pathetic whimper, his eyes squeezing shut as the officers began marching him toward the exit. The high society crowd parted for him, turning their faces away in absolute disgust. Skylar watched her husband being dragged away, her mouth open in a silent scream, finally realizing she was going to lose everything she valued. Simultaneously, the 2 federal agents approached my father. Harrison slowly raised his heavy head, his pristine silver hair now a disheveled mess. He looked up at the agents with hollow, defeated eyes. Harrison Sinclair, the lead federal agent, said, holding up a manila folder containing the signed warrants. We need you to come with us right now for immediate questioning regarding the massive misappropriation of corporate funds and federal pension embezzlement. My father did not say a single word. The once proud patriarch simply nodded his head, allowing the federal agents to escort him away from the ruins of his fraudulent legacy. As the authorities secured the two desperate men, a sudden movement caught my immediate attention. My mother Beatrice, who had been sobbing hysterically near the massive floral arrangements, suddenly lunged toward me. Her eyes were wide and manic, the perfect facade of the gracious society hostess entirely shattered. She reached out with her manicured hands and grabbed my bare arm. Her fingernails dug deeply into my skin with terrifying, desperate strength. She pulled me aggressively toward her, her face contorted into an ugly mask of pure venomous hatred. "You destroyed your own blood!" Beatrice hissed, her voice vibrating with a toxic mixture of suffocating grief and unhinged rage. "You deliberately ruined this family. We clothed you, we fed you, we gave you the prestigious Sinclair name, and you burned us all to the ground in front of everyone. You are an absolute monster, Madeline." Before I could process the sharp physical sting of her painted nails, Owen was there. My husband moved with swift, fiercely protective precision. He stepped directly between us, his large hands closing firmly around my mother's delicate wrists. He did not yell, but his expression was so intensely furious that Beatrice immediately stopped struggling. Owen forcibly pried her digging fingers off my arm, pushing her back just enough to establish a rigid boundary. "Do not ever touch my wife again." Owen stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded absolute obedience. Beatrice stumbled backward, clutching her bruised wrists, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I stepped out from behind Owen, smoothing the shimmering silk of my custom emerald gown. I looked my mother dead in the eye, feeling a profound sense of liberation washing over my soul. I had spent 35 years shrinking myself to fit perfectly into her narrow, emotionally abusive expectations. I was never going to shrink myself for her ever again. "No, Mom," I said, my voice incredibly steady, completely cold, and entirely devoid of any lingering pity. "I did not destroy this family, I just audited it. You destroyed yourselves." I turned away from her, breaking eye contact for the final time. I reached down and picked up my black leather briefcase, the simple container that held the powerful instruments of my liberation. I reached out and took Owen gently by the hand. Together we turned our backs on the stage, on my weeping mother and on my frozen sister. We walked down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. The crowd of wealthy investors parted for us immediately, no longer looking at me with polite indifference. They looked at me with profound respect. The quiet auditor had just dismantled a criminal empire without breaking a sweat. We walked through the heavy oak doors, stepping out of the suffocating ballroom and into the cool night air of the grand foyer. Outside the massive glass windows, the street was lined with police cruisers. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the darkness, catching the vibrant fabric of my emerald gown as we walked calmly into our new, completely free life. 3 weeks passed since the flashing lights illuminated the hotel foyer. 3 weeks is more than enough time for an empire to be completely erased. The fallout from the gala was spectacular and merciless. Federal investigators swooped into my father's firm the next morning, seizing servers, freezing accounts, and locking the executive suite. The board of directors ousted Harrison, though it hardly mattered. The company entered federal receivership, its assets liquidated to repay the employee pension funds. My father sat in a holding cell without bail. Meanwhile, Terrence found his real estate career permanently terminated. The state licensing board revoked his credentials within 48 hours of his arrest. Facing multiple felony charges, Terrence was looking at a decade behind bars. His high-interest lenders aggressively seized everything he owned to recoup their massive losses. Left with nothing but mounting legal bills, Schuyler was forced into a publicized personal bankruptcy. The Sinclair name was now nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered at country club luncheons. Stripped of her sprawling estate by the federal asset freeze, my mother packed whatever clothes she could carry into cheap duffel bags. She and Schuyler had nowhere else to turn. Their wealthy friends had abandoned them the moment the handcuffs clicked. Desperate, they retreated to the only property they believed was safe. It was a small downtown condo the family purchased years ago as an investment. It was a far cry from the opulent mansions they were accustomed to, but it had a roof, and they thought it belonged to them. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Beatrice and Schuyler dragged their heavy bags down the narrow, poorly lit hallway of the downtown building. They looked haggard, their designer clothes wrinkled and their faces pale with exhaustion. Schuyler reached the door of Unit 402, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the old brass key. She shoved it into the deadbolt and tried to turn it, but it refused to budge. She pulled it out, wiped her face, and tried again, pushing harder. The lock was completely rigid. "It is not going to open, Schuyler," I said, my voice echoing in the dim hallway. My sister and my mother whipped around simultaneously. I was leaning casually against the wall near the elevator, dressed in a sharp beige trench coat, holding a crisp manila folder. I watched the color drain from my mother's face. Madeline Beatrice gasped, her voice a fragile, broken whisper. "What are you doing here? Have you not done enough to us? We have nothing left." I walked slowly down the hallway, the rhythmic click of my heels echoing off the linoleum floor. I stopped a few feet away from them, looking at the cheap duffel bags resting by their feet. I opened the manila folder and pulled out a sheet of legal paper. I held it out toward my mother. "I am just here to deliver a document, Mom," I said smoothly. Since Terrence and Dad were so fond of real estate transactions, I thought it was fitting to engage in one myself. Beatrice hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached out and took the paper. Schuyler leaned over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the black text at the top of the page. It was an official notice of eviction. "You cannot evict us!" Schuyler snapped, a pathetic remnant of her old entitlement flaring up. "Dad bought this condo 5 years ago. This is our property. You have no right to lock us out." I offered her a cold, measured smile. "Actually, Dad stopped paying the mortgage on this condo 8 months ago." I corrected her, watching the realization wash over their exhausted faces. He was siphoning every available dollar to keep his sinking firm afloat and to fund your extravagant shopping habits. The bank initiated quiet foreclosure proceedings weeks before the gala. The property was severely defaulted and scheduled for public auction. Beatrice looked up at me, her eyes wide with a new, horrifying understanding. "You bought it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I did," I confirmed, my tone perfectly level. "I utilized the legally protected funds from the Maddie Trust. I approached the bank and purchased the defaulted mortgage outright. The deed to Unit 402 was transferred into my name this morning. The title is clear, the locks have been changed, and I am the sole owner of this property." My mother let out a wounded noise, clutching the eviction notice to her chest, as if it physically burned her. She looked at the locked door, then back at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Where are we supposed to go, Madeline?" she begged. "We do not have any money. We do not have anywhere to sleep tonight." I looked at the woman who had spent my life trying to make me feel invisible and utterly worthless. I looked at the sister who had participated in a scheme to steal my inheritance just to fund her vanity. I felt no obligation to soften their landing. "According to state tenancy laws, you have exactly 24 hours to clear any belongings out of the unit," I stated, stepping toward the elevator. "I will have a property manager meet you here tomorrow at 9 to supervise the removal. If you are not gone by 10, I will call the police and have you cited for trespassing." "But we are your family." Beatrice sobbed, tears spilling down her face. "You were my family," I replied, pressing the button to summon the elevator. "Now you are just a liability, and I do not keep liabilities on my ledger." The elevator doors slid open behind me. I stepped inside, turned around and pressed the button for the lobby. Beatrice and Schuyler stood frozen in the hallway, surrounded by their cheap bags, clutching an eviction notice they could not fight. I maintained eye contact with them as the heavy doors slowly slid shut, sealing them out of my life forever. The elevator descent felt like shedding a heavy, suffocating skin. Leaving that dimly lit hallway meant leaving behind 35 years of emotional manipulation and relentless familial duty. A few days later, Owen and I packed our bags and left our apartment in the city. We drove out to the coastline, leaving the concrete and the noise far behind us. When we pulled up to the sweeping cobblestone driveway of my grandparents' coastal estate, the air immediately felt different. It was crisp, carrying the sharp, clean scent of salt and wild seagrass. The massive property stood exactly as I remembered it from my childhood summers, a grand but welcoming structure of weathered cedar shingles and wide, generous windows. We walked up the wooden steps to the expansive wraparound porch that offered an unobstructed view of the Atlantic Ocean. The ocean breeze was wonderfully calm and quiet, offering a gentle rhythm that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic, frantic energy my parents and sister constantly generated. I sat down in one of the oversized wicker chairs, letting my shoulders drop and my jaw unclench. Owen brought out 2 steaming mugs of black coffee, handing one to me, before sitting in the chair beside mine. I held the warm ceramic mug between my hands, watching the tide slowly roll onto the white sand. For as long as my memory stretched, I had been the designated scapegoat of the Sinclair family. I was the receptacle for their insecurities, their failures, and their boundless vanity. If my father had a bad day at the manufacturing firm, it was somehow my fault for being too quiet or too difficult. If my mother felt her social standing slipping, she blamed my refusal to wear the right clothes or socialize with the right elite families. I was subjected to decades of constant, insidious gaslighting. They conditioned me to believe that my boundaries were acts of profound selfishness, and that my desire for a simple, honest life was a symptom of pathetic ambition. I spent my entire adolescence and most of my adult life battling a deeply ingrained feeling of never being enough. I constantly audited my own personality, trying to find the flaw that made my parents incapable of loving me the way they loved Skylar. But sitting here on this porch listening to the soothing crash of the ocean waves, I finally understood the absolute truth. The flaw was never inside of me. The flaw was fundamentally woven into their character. I rested my coffee mug on the small wooden table separating Owen and me. I reached into my canvas tote bag and pulled out a thick legal document securely bound in a leather portfolio. It was the finalized, federally recognized deed to the coastal estate, firmly held within the unassailable protection of the Maddie Trust. I ran my fingers over the heavy paper, feeling the embossed seals and the notarized signatures. This document was so much more than a simple record of property ownership. It was a tangible manifestation of my grandparents' genuine, unconditional love. They had seen the greed infecting my father. They had watched my mother parade my sister around while pushing me into the shadows. They knew that one day my family would try to strip me of everything I had built. So they gave me this sanctuary, and I had used my own intellect to build an impenetrable wall around it. I looked at the legal text, feeling a profound sense of pride replacing the old familiar guilt. I realized in that quiet moment that true power is never about seeking revenge loudly. It is not about screaming on a stage or destroying someone else just to prove your dominance. True power is about building an unassailable fortress in absolute silence. It is about understanding the rules of the game so completely that you can outmaneuver your opponents without ever raising your voice. I leaned back in the wicker chair, letting the late afternoon sun warm my face. The sky was beginning to turn a brilliant shade of orange and pale pink. Owen reached across the space between us and intertwined his fingers with mine. His presence was a steady, comforting anchor, a reminder of the beautiful chosen family I had built entirely on my own terms. Just as I took another slow sip of my coffee, the tranquil silence was broken by a harsh mechanical vibration. My cell phone resting on the table next to my mug began to buzz violently against the wood. The screen illuminated, displaying a notification for a new urgent voicemail. It was from a blocked number, but I did not need caller identification to know exactly who was on the other end of the line. It was Skylar. The property manager had undoubtedly arrived at the downtown condo to enforce the eviction. She was calling to scream, to beg, to hurl insults, or to demand a second chance she absolutely did not deserve. Her toxic energy was desperately trying to reach across the distance and pull me back into the endless cycle of family drama. I stared at the glowing screen for a long, quiet moment. The old version of me would have listened to that voicemail out of a misplaced sense of duty. The old Madeline would have felt a twinge of guilt, wondering if she was being too harsh, wondering if a daughter and a sister owed her abusers just one more conversation. But that woman no longer existed. She had been completely burned away in the fires of their betrayal. I picked up the vibrating cell phone. Next to my coffee mug was a tall glass of ice water Owen had brought out earlier. Without a single ounce of hesitation, without a shred of anger or regret, I simply dropped the expensive device directly into the water. It sank to the bottom with a soft clinking sound. The screen flickered wildly for a brief second before going completely permanently dark. The screen flickered wildly for a brief second before going completely permanently dark. That was the last time I ever heard my sister speak. 6 months passed since that quiet afternoon on the porch. The seasons changed, bringing a bitter, biting winter to the Connecticut coastline, but my life had never felt warmer or more secure. The federal government, however, was just beginning to dismantle the frozen ruins of the Sinclair Empire. Harrison Sinclair and his manufacturing company were officially placed into federal receivership due to the overwhelming mountain of evidence proving his embezzlement and corporate fraud. The Department of Justice required an independent elite risk auditing firm to oversee the massive corporate liquidation and complex asset redistribution. They contracted my firm. Because I was the senior auditor who initially uncovered the structural rot, I was appointed as the lead liquidator. That is exactly how I found myself standing in the center of what used to be my father's sprawling corner office, methodically dismantling the very last remnants of his fraudulent legacy. I stood behind his massive mahogany desk, packing away years of falsified expense reports and dummy vendor contracts into sterile white cardboard banker boxes. The room, once a monument to his suffocating arrogance, now felt entirely hollow. The expensive artwork had been seized. The luxurious leather couches were completely gone. Only the cold, analytical reality of his numerous financial crimes remained. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the executive suite burst open. I looked up from my laptop, my hands resting calmly on the keyboard. Harrison Sinclair stumbled into the room. He was currently out on bail, awaiting a federal trial that would inevitably end in a lengthy prison sentence, and the stress had completely ravaged him. He looked incredibly aged, his once pristine silver hair thinning and unkempt. His posture, always so rigidly commanding, was stooped and entirely defeated. He wore a rumpled coat over a faded sweater, stripped of his former elite glory. He had somehow managed to bypass the lobby security driven by pure, unadulterated desperation. "Madeline, you have to listen to me," Harrison pleaded, his voice cracking as he closed the distance between us. He stopped a few feet from the desk, his hands shaking visibly. He attempted one last pathetic manipulation, trying to play the father card he had abandoned decades ago. "Please, Maddie, you know everything about the corporate structure. You know about the secondary offshore account, the golden parachute. I need you to authorize the release of those funds." He leaned forward, his eyes wide and begging. "Your mother and I are living in a cheap motel off the interstate. We have nothing to eat. We have absolutely nothing left. You have already won this war, Maddie. You proved your point to the entire city. But do not be unnecessarily cruel. We are still your family. We are still your flesh and blood. You cannot just leave us to die in the gutter." I listened to his desperate, manipulative pleas, feeling the familiar rhythm of his gaslighting attempt to take hold. But there was absolutely no guilt left for him to exploit. I did not raise my voice to shout over him. I did not shed a single tear for his miserable self-inflicted circumstances. I simply reached out and turned my sleek silver laptop around, pushing it across the polished mahogany surface so the bright screen faced him directly. I pointed to the glowing spreadsheet displayed on the monitor. It was the finalized, zeroed-out audit ledger of his hidden offshore accounts. "I did not take your golden parachute out of cruelty, Dad," I said, my voice dropping into a quiet, absolute calm that commanded the empty room. I took it for balance. Harrison stared at the screen, his breath hitching in his throat as his eyes scanned the highlighted columns. I used my legal authority as the government-appointed lead auditor to completely liquidate your hidden offshore funds, I explained, watching the final sliver of hope drain from his face. I seized every single cent you tried to hide, and I redirected all of it back into the pension accounts of the working-class employees you systematically stole from. The money is gone, Dad. The factory floor workers are finally whole again, and your parachute has been permanently cut. Harrison collapsed into the single remaining plastic visitor chair, completely and utterly broken. He realized in that devastating moment that his own daughter had entirely outplayed him in the exact corporate arena he had always claimed she was too weak and simple-minded to understand. He buried his face in his trembling hands, letting out a hollow, defeated sob. I did not offer him a tissue. I did not offer him a comforting lie. I simply raised my hand and signaled toward the open doorway. Two federal marshals who had followed his frantic sprint past the lobby, security stepped into the corner office. They grabbed Harrison by the arms, pulling him out of the plastic chair with professional, unfeeling efficiency. My father was escorted out of his own building, dragged through the hallways in the exact same dismissive, degrading way he used to treat his loyal employees. I stood alone in the empty corner office, walking around the mahogany desk to look out through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The sprawling city skyline stretched out before me, bathed in the crisp, clear light of a winter afternoon. I had successfully protected my grandparents' coastal legacy. I had saved the retirement pensions of hundreds of innocent people. And most importantly, I had permanently excised the toxic, manipulative rot from my life. I calmly closed my laptop and slid it into my briefcase. I picked it up, feeling pure freedom. I walked out, pulling the heavy wooden door shut behind me. I walked toward the elevator, my heels echoing in the silence. I was no longer the family scapegoat. I was the apex auditor, and my books were finally perfectly balanced,